This is the Gentleman Villain
Right.
podcast. Like when someone on Twitter said, "Hey, you guys talk about all these subjects," and I go, "Hey, man, the subject is Mr. Regal on every show. The subject is what his thoughts are and what he wants to say." And so we are talking about your entrance to WCW,
Right. So
but at the
let's
same time,
let's
it is your
please
show
take notes of all these things I'm saying so I can expand on them
for sure.
because there's so much that we can
Well,
expand on.
speaking of expansion,
So
Mr. Regal,
now do you want to just start off how I ended up in WCW?
now, Mr. Regal, uh, you've told the story before, and I hate to use this podcast, tell stories we've told before, but you contacted, maybe through somebody else, Mr. Bill Watts, who was,
Yes.
running the company, and old school, like his 8 by 10 and a letter,
Yes.
and he brings you in. You talk about you immediately meet these people, these like-minded people, Terry Taylor, Ricky Steamboat, Paul Mr. Wonderful, Orndorff, Arn Anderson. What did you have a creative meeting when you first got there? Like, here's how we
Okay.
want to present you, here's what your character is, or is it
So
just totally
this is
different?
this is what happened. So I turn up on the 23rd of January. Um, I stay at the Ramada Hotel by the airport in Atlanta. On Monday morning, I went down for breakfast and I see Chris, and he sat with Harley Race, and all the wrestlers had come into town on the Sunday night.
You're
I
very
got to
well
meet,
aware who Harley Race is, right?
of course I was.
Okay.
I was a huge fan, and I got to meet him, and we were very close from that moment onwards. Again, another pod because I absolutely thought the world of Harley. Again, there's another person. It's just now that I've mentioned that, from day one, I had a sounding board because straight away he started talking to me about Wild Angus. Friend of mine from England, Steve McCoy, he'd wrestled in the NWA in Charlotte in the late '80s, and unfortunately, he didn't have a work visa, and he wrestled there for a while. Steve Casey, he wrestled there sometimes. I know there's American Steve Casey, but he wrestled with Steve McCoy, and I think that's what he was called over here. But his dad, yeah, and he was actually moving from the NWA to the Louisiana territory in the '80s. Went back, got stopped on the way in because he didn't have a visa and got a 5-year ban, so he couldn't come back to America. That's another story, right? So he was really good. Another person I got to wrestle a lot when I was young. He was
And that kind of thing
fantastic.
still happens, Mike
Yeah,
Speedball Bailey just got
yeah.
back in the US after, I think, a 5-year deal, like, just like that. It's tough.
So his father used to wrestle in America as Black Angus. He was a big Scotsman, and as a child, he was one of my favourite villains. He was a huge man, big long beard, long hair, wore a kilt, real proper old time wrestling villain. Well, he wrestled. He came over here, and Steve told me that he didn't see his dad for 18 months. That's how this job used to be, because he came and he couldn't come going backwards and forwards because once he got in, he didn't have a work visa. Um, and he went to Calgary, and he went to a lot of the lads from Britain used to go to Vancouver, and they'd go to Calgary. Some of them got into America and they stayed, and different things. That's so. Straight away, I started talking to Harley Race, and he asked me if I knew Frankie's name was that, and I didn't know Wild Angus. It used to be called Wild Angus in Britain. If you any historians out there, they can look up. He wrestled in the Central States territories as Black Angus, and he wrestled Harley a lot. So I had There's another sounding board back to what we were talking about before. Um, so I came in, and then I go to TV that day. I think it was 2 o'clock call time. Well, I get there early. I didn't want to ask any of the people, even Chris, because I'd only met Chris once before. I'd been on a show with him in France. I didn't wrestle him that day, but we were there. And so I met him, and because we knew so many of the same people, he introduced me to Harley. There was a few other fellas that I said hello to. I didn't want to ask anybody for a ride because I thought they don't know me. So I got a taxi down early from the Ramada Hotel to Center Stage in Atlanta. And I get there, and I've got a letter that said I had to go and introduce myself to Dusty Rhodes. So I'm there early. So I knock on the back doors. It's like a small loading dock. It's a music venue. It's a small music venue, Center Stage. I knock on the back doors, somebody comes, I said, I'm here with WCW, it's my first day. I've got this letter. I've got to meet Mr. Rhodes. Next thing, somebody I became friends with later on, but I didn't know him at the time. A big, gruff looking fella come walking up, Doug Dillinger, who was the security for WCW for years, at the same time as being a full time policeman in Charlotte at in North Carolina. Um, So Doug came, and when you first meet Doug until you got to know him, and with a lot of people, he stayed gruff. But if he figured out you were a straight up fella, like a lot of it was just being even at 24, I was a grown man, I was polite, and grown men figure each other out. When we're talking about Ron Simmons, like Ron was in WCW, then I was another fella. Straight away, we got on with each other. You just and you have we talk. You end up with this Paul Orndorff, same experiences. We've all gone through this thing to get us to this point. We've all come from different worlds. We all, but we've all ended up being proper pro wrestlers. We're the real deal, right? We can do this, and you attach to like minded pro wrestlers, right? Wherever I went in the world, there was sort of always I know it sounds bad, but there was an us and them. We're like the ones who've actually earned a spot here, and then there's sometimes didn't matter where you went, there's these people who haven't earned the spot here. And it was just the way it was. And it's just the way it was. Right. Ron Simmons, another person who was incredibly helpful to me from day one. Right. He was there and I'm not sure if he was there day one, but he was on the shows when I first came to America, always helpful, we always got on really well.